Welcome everybody to Radicalized Truth Survives. We have another breaker with our friend Paul Mason, who is in the UK, looking fabulous, I might say. Paul is our friend who wrote How to Stop Fascism. He's a wonderful investigative reporter, reports a lot about the war in Ukraine, does some incredible work relating to environmental issues and political issues. Paul, you wrote a book called How to Stop Fascism. We've talked about that book before, but I think it's very important that we sort of revisit it before we jump into some of the contemporary things I want to talk with you about, because I think we just sort of hit a turning point where people are finally willing to call what we are experiencing fascism. Can you comment on that?
Well, it's great to be with all of you again. And I think almost the overarching theme of the work I'm doing, and maybe of this interview, is that what we're seeing is the confluence, the coming together of two big stories. The big story that you and particularly I'm thinking Jim, with his ongoing war with Mike Flynn, what you guys have been fighting is Trump and the fascistization of American politics, which we can talk about. Here in the European continent, the number one issue is the Ukraine war. And for obvious reasons, it is on our doorstep. I was in the country of Estonia last month, where you can literally, you're within in the capital, you're within artillery range of a Russian army. And here, we're about to discuss the Vilnius summit next week about whether Ukraine joins NATO. But what I'm seeing now is that the two stories are now linked. Putin is very likely to suffer a big operational reverse on the battlefield in Ukraine over the next 3 months. He's looking for an out. We can maybe just discuss why and how that out could happen. But the ultimate out for Putin, and the way he turns operational defeat into strategic victory, is that Trump wins the election. Even if he wins the 2024 American presidential election from jail, it screws NATO. It blows NATO apart. It removes every underpinning of geopolitical certainty here in the continent of Europe, where I am. And so, what I think, to answer your question, why we're beginning to see parts of liberalism, parts of the US Democratic Party, parts of the European centrist political scene understand finally the relevance of the far right info war that we are part of, is that they now realize that if Trump wins, that will pull the rug from under everything that's been certain here in Europe since 1945. I think it's as big as that. So what I say in the book is that, and I'm not the only person who's ever said this, we've got to stop obsessing about tiny political groups, bigger political groups like, say, the Oath Keepers or the Proud Boys, tiny online presences like Stormfront or Atomwaffen, and then Trump. We've got to stop asking ourselves the first question being, which one is fascist, which one is right-wing populist, which one is just a national conservative? And we have to start from the question, where do they fit into the process of fascism? It's that process that we should obsess with. And if we can win that argument with the European Centre and the American Democratic Centre to understand that the process is underway and the process is not easily reversible, you can stop it, but it's still going to take hard yards to stop that process. You then pose the next and most obvious question: what is our strategy? Yeah. The right has a strategy. Putin has a strategy. Trump has a strategy. Biden doesn't seem to me to have a strategy. And I know for a fact, as I've been talking to people in the European social democratic space, they don't have a strategy. So that's where the discussion should be. Of course, it should have been there 24 months ago.
Right.
A process of fascist radicalization of politics and the overthrow of democracy is underway. What is our strategy?
One of the things that I try and say as often as possible is fascism doesn't stop on its own. you have to defeat it, right? Because by its very nature, it will never stop, right? And I feel that there is too much, people feeling like they're able to live with fascism or live with fascism somewhere else without them realizing that the entire point of fascism is to expand and to take you, right?
Yeah.
So I just wanted to say that I feel it's important that people understand it's a monster that doesn't stop. Sorry, Heidi, go ahead.
I know Hi-Fi wants to come in, but what I would say is that to people in, say, Florida, asking, why did the books get removed from my library? Same in Texas, in Italy, same-sex couples are seeing their parentage being removed from the birth certificates of their children under a far-right government. And when they start asking, hold on, how does this happen? It's not explained by the political science characterization of Giorgia Meloni's Fratelli d'Italia party. It's not explained by the political characterization of the Florida Republican Party. Interesting though that might be, it's explained by the fact that you're in a. Antonio Gramsci, the Italian Marxist, said it in 1921. You're in the process of disintegration of democracy, where elemental forces are unleashed that don't fit into a lot of political science categories, but the outcomes do. Suddenly, your books disappeared from the library. Suddenly, your names disappeared from your own child's birth certificate. And what comes next is what you see in places like Georgia. I mean, Georgia the country, not Georgia the state. Georgia the country. Journalists, effectively tarred and feathered. LGBT pride march broken up with impunity. The police standing by saying, "Sorry, nothing we can do." It's the oppressed. It's LGBTQ plus people who feel it first. It's black people in America who feel it first. But in the end, we're sitting around, four experienced white identified journalists on this screen in front of me. It's come to us. It'll come to us. So we have to tell those liberal, sort of comfortably off people, probably on the east and west coasts of America, and in a few university cities in the middle, it's coming to you. You've got to realize it's coming to you. And the deadline, because Putin has a hurry up offense here. Putin needs it to happen in November, December 2024, because that's the last chance. I think that's the last chance. We may discuss. I have a very bleak view of what happens if Trump wins. What happens is you get the state level disintegration of the rule of law, because what happens is you get individual states, and we could see them now in that kind of Republican redoubt in the northern Midwest of America, getting ready now to say, no, we don't recognize any outcome of 2024 that isn't Trump, even if he's in jail, even if multiply indicted, he's in jail. So you've got to get ready for that. There's not long. It's less than 2 years.
So you say, we're all journalists here, except I don't feel like a journalist. I feel like a soldier in a war.
Yeah.
And the only part of that war that is kinetic, that involves dying currently on a large scale, is in Ukraine. But I see mental casualties of this war all across the globe. I see people buying into the fascism. I see people believing the lies. And I just, what is your sense? Are people starting to realize that they're being lied to by the fascist movement, or no?
Well, I think it depends who you're talking about. One of my focuses at the moment is to the contrary, that we are also seeing a disappointing development on the left, where parts of the left want to be in this war, but they want to be fighting liberal centrism as the number one enemy. And we're seeing here the emergence of, just like everywhere, we have the remnants of orthodox communism in Britain. And just like everywhere, I hoped that they would one day just evaporate when the last one died. But unfortunately, that it's being revived. We now have young people marching around in red balaclavas, chanting the name of Joseph Stalin on the streets, and they're not concerned. They're overtly not so concerned about Trump, fascism, Giorgia Meloni, the AfD now on 18%, the Alternative for Deutschland, far-right party in Germany. I was reading today in Belgium, we've got the two far-right parties in a specific ethnic enclave called Flanders on 40%. But they're not bothered about that. What they're bothered about is Joe Biden, Keir Starmer, Bernie Sanders, even AOC, traitors, that agenda of what I think we could probably agree to call Confusionism, the Confusionist left, the Glenn Greenwalds, the Aaron Mate, Michael Tracy, irrelevant though they may be, not that irrelevant when they're turning up at the UN Security Council, by the way, but that agenda of theirs has unfortunately percolated through to parts of the left. So I think liberalism, social democracy is starting to get it. But if you're, I'm flitting around here, but the Dutch government, the government of the Netherlands, has just fallen over its failure to enact an anti-migrant law. And one of the responses to that was that the Dutch Labour Party, it's called the PVDA, the Partij van de Arbeid, the Workers' Party, used to be as big as Labour, is now down to 4%. So in a panic, they're fusing with the Green Party, and their Green Party is a good Green Party. It's not a kind of Trump-fronted Green Party. So you're seeing this almost panic reaction. Shit, we've got to do something, and I think they're right. The European social democracies, the liberalisms of America, Canada, etc., have just got to take a choice now. Like you say, we're in a war. The war is multifaceted. It is information. It is, as you say, Jim, a mind war. It's a kinetic war in Ukraine. It is a war on migrants everywhere. France was a war zone for 3 weeks. So yeah, everything depends on what liberalism and centrism does. We're not big enough. So like in the 30s, it depends whether they get it, and whether any elements of conservatism actually understand self-preservation. You've got to break with these guys before they break you.
There's so many things that I want to discuss with you while we have this time, but where I want to start is when you talk about Confusionism, which is brilliant. What we have happening here and what this show was formed for is that we are on the receiving end of a multi-front information war. And that word is not a sexy word. It's what Jim calls this invisible war. So when we talk about information warfare, it doesn't have the kind of jarring impact that a bomb being dropped on your home might have, right? So we have this multi-front information war. We have no leadership globally uniting, holding, summits, standing up and saying, the West is being targeted by a multi-front cognitive hybrid warfare. The tech bros are involved. Here's what we're going to do to fight back. We obviously would have the ability to start, siphoning off, start stopping much of this. And we have the knowledge of it, like in 2014, when Russia invades Ukraine and obfuscates to the point that we don't really know that they're, invading Ukraine, or we're talking about something else, or maybe it's this, maybe it's that. And then in 2016, they did it again. So here we are in 2023, a year that's very, very dangerous, where we are in the middle of this multi-front assault. And I will put Robert Kennedy Jr. as part of this assault, because he is there to siphon votes away from Joe Biden. And we are desperate in this country for a leader. And I love Joe Biden, all the good work that he's doing. But we are desperate for a leader to acknowledge the information war and give us some resources to fight it. We've got Jim Stewartson on Twitter, thankfully he's back, pointing out that Sound of Freedom is nothing more than a QAnon war. And why this matters is because I get calls every day from senior citizens whose spouses are watching this fucking film, and their spouses are now down the QAnon rabbit hole. And guess what? We've lost another one, one at a time at scale. So we have an urgency that's not being met.
I totally agree. And it's, if you think about it, we have enough information now. Whether or not, on what basis Trump goes to prison, on what basis, on what level of proof is ever put, on some of the links between Flynn and QAnon that you suggest, Jim. We have enough information to say two incontrovertible facts. Russia is waging hybrid war onto the West, and it's very sophisticated hybrid warfare, because it not only uses, as it were, proxies to promote its agenda. So we see Max Blumenthal from the Grey Zone is sitting in the UN Security Council telling lies on Russia's behalf, but it also revels in all confusion. That is, anything that suggests to people that they can't believe their own eyes and ears, anything that suggests to people that they cannot believe their eyes and ears, but only, as Hannah Arendt said, their imaginations. Anything that suggests to them that the simple explanation, the conspiracy explanation, must be true, also serves to break up democracy. It serves to break up the space in which democracies can function. That is ongoing. Putin is on an information offensive into America, into Europe, and that is, whether or not he's on the back foot in Ukraine, that will continue. Russia has strategic strength in depth, and it has operatives to do these things. That's the first incontrovertible fact. The second incontrovertible fact is that Trump intends to stand, and he intends to stand this time as a detonator for the breakup of the American Federal Republic. It's absolutely clear if you read it. What we could and should, maybe you should do a program on this. You war game it out. What is the first thing that has to happen? The first thing that has to happen is that Trump is indicted, okay, but the state he is in does not arrest him. That is, he doesn't present himself. Next thing is he stands for election. Maybe the GOP is the first thing that actually blows apart, because you have to have a primary process. You then have to have a convention. Do they ever get a convention? So it's long before we get to November 2024, we're going to see seeds planted whereby state governors are asked to defy the will of the federal government, maybe over another Supreme Court ruling, another one they pull out of a hat. Hey, here's this other thing we just imagined. You've got to be aware of that. And unless, of course, we can't say that there are certain things that the US state should be doing. It has to protect the national security of its citizens. And I'm absolutely certain that the three-letter agencies understand that Trump is the front end of a Russian hybrid warfare offensive against American democracy, but they are limited in what they can do. They're even now limited by what they can do by the recent Supreme Court, not a Supreme Court judgment, the court judgment on the relationship with the social media agencies. So it's not the state that has to own the counteroffensive. The counteroffensive has to be owned by political parties and movements. And then when you look at the Democratic Party, it isn't a party. It isn't a movement. It's a committee. So, and then what's left? What's the final thing? Where are the mass movements? You could say the major movements of Black people in America, the major NGOs like Anti-Defamation League, Southern Poverty Law Center. The problem they've got is that then when they go to their mass base, what do they find in the mass base? They find the ideas are already seeded. Oh no, you can't. No, you can't ally with the American state against Trump, because that's going to almost be like it's equivalent of Jim Crow. Who put that there?
Yeah,
the Confusionists. Who put that? Because all they ever do
right.
is undermine Biden, undermine American democracy.
Right.
So we're high. It's past high time for a political leadership in the USA. Maybe it doesn't come from Biden. Maybe it has to come from a person below Biden who rallies the cause. We're seeing some of this. I maybe talk about this. It happened in Spain right now with the emergence of a left candidate in the general election in Spain. There's a left candidate called Yolanda Diaz. And if this was a live program, I would ask you to float some video of Yolanda speaking right now, because what she's chosen to do is to not fight head to head with the far right party that's going to possibly even come third in the election, might even get into the government. She's not fighting them head to head. What she's doing is she's saying, this is what hope looks like. Yeah. This is what it would look like if there was a hopeful left that just said, forget these guys. We have the answers. To be fair, the leader of the Spanish socialists, the leader of the Spanish government, Pedro Sanchez, is doing that in his own way. We will see whether it works, but I would advise people to look very carefully at some of these European races, because it shows how you can use political parties and movements and campaigns to do the necessary fight back and strategizing in a way that states that are bound by constitutional law and the First Amendment, blah, 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 just can't really do right now anyway.
So we're going to show a clip of her. Thank you for that.
Os dereitos das mulleres, de pisotear os dereitos das persoas LGTBI, pero tamén de pisotear a liberdade, a cultura no noso país. E hoxe, como escoitei ao Partido Popular dicir que teñen un compromiso coa liberdade creativa e contra a censura, vou facer unha proposta. Acabo de remitir unha carta a todos os candidatos que se presentan á presidencia do goberno para que academos, antes de que remate esta campaña electoral, un pacto contra a censura e un pacto a favor da liberdade artística no noso país.
But what I want to say is that when Joe Biden tries to get smart people to deal with this issue, you know what happens? Full-fledged information warfare attacks.
Exactly.
That's what I'm talking about. Whether it's Nina or our friend Jackie Singh, they pay a lot of money to disparage these people, and rather than stand behind these women, they end up resigning. So I would like to see that change. And the other thing I want to say is that in Brazil, Bolsonaro is not allowed to run for political office for 8 years because he lied about the election outcome. Where are those big moves in America right now? Because what you are bringing up is what we need to see, because the house is on fire and nobody is acknowledging the severity of it.
Yeah. I mean,
could I just remind, just building on that, of something you said last time we spoke, which is in America, the First Amendment allows you to talk about genocide, and the Second Amendment allows you to commit it. Or I don't want to butcher your quote.
No, that's right. I mean, I think it's always worth saying that here in the United Kingdom, we don't have a perfect democracy, but we got along quite well with being able to ban fascist parties, ban fascist uniforms. It is even now illegal to wear any uniform that is not the uniform of a state body in Britain. Shut down the fascist funding, and of course, shut down almost all access to firearms. I live in a capital city of what I hope is a great country, and only the police have firearms, and the criminals, but their firearms are so bad that it's not the equivalent of what you could buy over the counter age 18 in the United States. So we've got along quite well with some restrictions on freedom that enhance freedom, and that's the argument I would be wanting to have with my American counterparts. We're in a war with fascism and its proxies, And democracy has to be militant. This is the point I make in the book. It's the point was made by a German-American jurist called Karl Lowenstein in 1938. Fascism is a technique. It can be beaten through techniques, and you have to get down to techniques. You can be quite managerial, mobilize so many technocratic people who like doing this stuff. There are techniques of beating it, and they're well known. And unfortunately, the American Constitution prevents the deployment of one of them, which is shutting down their platforms. They have no right to freedom of reach. They have a right to say what they want. They have, as long as it's not incitement to violence, which is a crime. But they don't have any right to freedom of reach. And this is the argument we've got to have. Of course, we're losing that argument now massively because of Musk taking over Twitter. We'll see whether we can win that argument again in the social media boardrooms by mid-2024.
Before Hi-Fi jumps in, I just want to say one thing. I want to apologize on behalf of America for importing culture wars your way. We just had a vibrant discussion with the Byline Supplement team on culture wars really seeping into the conversation in the UK, and that means nothing good because it's another way to manipulate people to vote against their own interests. Hi-Fi.
You mentioned incitement to violence, and I just need to point out for our audience that we just had the 45th president of the United States attempt to assassinate the 44th president of the United States using one of his radicalized cult followers. And, you know, the media, the corporate media in the United States is reporting this as, boy, Trump sure is reckless with his posting.
Yeah.
How do you even address that?
You again, I think I'll come back to it and say you need a cadre of political leaders, and I mean leaders. I mean people with status. I'm talking senators. I'm talking representatives, governors of states who are prepared to say and prepared to summon the apparatus, which would be the NGOs, the campaigns, all the kind of polling and campaigning apparatus that goes into, say, an American election, into a campaign to do two things. We can't just push back. We can't just say, hey, these guys are maniacs. These guys are proxies for a fascist totalitarian regime. You have to say that, but then you have to give a living, breathing alternative. Only at this stage that we are in the process, only the living, breathing alternative. So if we look at what's happening in Spain, Yolanda Diaz, she's an old-time, what we call Euro-communist, a communist who made their peace with democracy and decided to play within the system. She's the Minister of Labour in the current government. When it came to Ukraine, a lot of leftists in her political alliance said, hey, let's not send arms to Ukraine. She said, let's send arms to Ukraine. That was her instinct. Instinctively, we're going to play ball. We're going to do what's needed to be done. What she did when the election was called, all the left factions said, hey, you know what, we've got some very charismatic, very young, very sort of feisty people who should be leading this. She said, no, I'm going to lead it. I'm going to form a new party. It's called Sumar Together. The slogan is very simple. Es por ti. It's for you. It looks and sound bland. Their color is pink. Look, she looks like she'd go down very well on any American primetime channel as a presenter. She looks good on screen. What's she doing? She's saying, here's the living, breathing alternative. Feminism, shorter working week, limits on new laws to punish domestic violence. It's right in the face of the far right in a way that the far right doesn't like, because instead of saying, hey, you guys are communists, you guys are, all the stuff they throw at us, they have to say, no, we like domestic violence. No, we like working long hours. We don't want these laws. So I think we can learn a lot from that. I mean, she's only the leader of a left party on 15%. But if she hadn't done what she did, there would be 4 left parties, each on less than the sum of 15%. They'd be struggling. And there wouldn't be this catchy and engaging campaign. Someone in the Democrats has to start doing that. And of course, instead, what do we get? We get Cornel West. We get Marianne Williamson. We get, you mentioned it, RFK. Instead, all the running within the Democrats is now being made by people who are either openly there to split the vote, or will just play the function that Jill Stein did in 2016.
That's exactly right.
Get real, understand. Someone has to be there below Biden doing this kind of stuff. It's not information warfare. It's actually just basic politics. The politics of hope are what defeats fascism.
That's beautiful. Thank you for that. So I want to take advantage of having you here and talk about something that our friend Michael McKay, who's a wonderful analyst who's been writing daily about the war in Ukraine for 9+ years. He talked on our show last about Putin's irrational fatalism. He basically, what we're seeing is that what Putin's been effective at is hybrid warfare. Obviously, what we're seeing is less so on the ground. And I would like you to expand on Putin's irrational fatalism, if you believe that. And let's kind of jump in and talk a bit about what happened just 2 weeks ago. Literally just 2.5 weeks ago, There was the psycho circus of the madmen of Moscow. And, you and I were like tweeting in real time. I'm like, is it this? Is it like we were trying to understand what was happening. So let's jump off and talk a bit about that.
I've said for a long time that Putin was probably radicalized during the lockdown from authoritarianism to outright fascism. I don't know that for the case, because most human beings close to Putin have not met Putin, let alone people like me who are not close to him. But we know what the intellectual core of Putinism is now Duginism. It's Alexander Dugin's fourth political movement. It is Russian ethno-nationalist fascism, which says two things. Three things. Russia should rule Europe, and Eurasia should be a Russo-centric, white, Christian, straight, obviously, empire. That's number one. Two, it should be done through violence, and the violence is purative. It's cathartic. It's what's needed for the modern world. Three, if that results in the end of modernity, good, because they're not just at war with, say, LGBT rights. They're at war with democracy. They're at war with the Renaissance. They're at war with the Enlightenment. That's what they want to get rid of. And Dugin says that clearly in his books. Fourth, and finally, if we fail, what's the point of the world without us? Now, that's the idea. Late in the Third Reich, Joseph Goebbels held a press conference at which he is reported to have said, if we are defeated, we will slam the door so hard that the building falls down. He meant we'll just destroy everything. That's Putinism. He said it in 2018. What is the point of the world if Russia is not in it? So when we then come to look at the Prigozhin coup, okay, there were a lot of people around me. I know, like many people, live in a world that is half journalists, half experts. And the experts I love, the academics I love. But basically, a lot of them were looking at this as saying, okay, I'm an academic. My reputation depends on what I say in the next 24, 48 hours. Either I can't say anything, or I'm going to hedge my bets because we just don't have enough evidence. And from an academic point of view, they're right. From a journalist point of view, and also a strategist's point of view, you can't take those decisions. This is what I said. I was in Greece at the time, got up at 6 a.m., looked at what was happening. I'd seen the likelihood it was going to happen the night before, contacted my contacts and said, look, quick, just tell me what's happening, and made my own judgment. And my judgment, based on the contacts and my own analysis, was, you've used this word before, Heidi, KFABE, the professional wrestling discipline. It's hard to get your head around, but as a metaphor, it's perfect, because there is real blood in professional wrestling. There is real violence, but the ring is where it happens. Sometimes it happens outside the ring, but it happens within a choreographed and limited set of rules. And what I think happened with the Prigozhin coup, and I said it on the morning, this is a kayfabe coup. It's not about overthrowing Putin. It's about sidelining Shoigu and Gerasimov, the two military leaders. Well, how do we know that? Because that's what he says it's about. I think he expected to drive all the way to Moscow and have a meeting with Putin. And at some point, somebody, we don't know who, in the military hierarchy took seriously Putin's call to stop them. And they bombed the convoy. The convoy fired back. Sadly, some Russian soldiers who expected to just be sort of policing their own airspace died, in needlessly. And then what happens? By sort of 6 o'clock in the evening, I'm thinking, okay, shit, maybe I was wrong. Maybe this is going to turn out into a real mini civil war. Well, within 2 hours, Prigozhin calls off the whole thing. And we now know, we came out today, 5 days later, Prigozhin and 35 members of Wagner Group met Putin for negotiations. What is that? It's a staged chaos. Why? Here's the payload of what I'm trying to say. I looked at it in the wider context. I said, well, what's he done? What's he done? The Ukrainian counteroffensive is not going well from a point of view of reconquering territory, although it is happening now. But from a force destruction point of view, I suspect it's going very well. It's destroying Putin's forces' ability to maneuver on the ground. That's going to take time. It's not Desert Storm. There is no air force to do it for you. It takes time. Okay, he knows he's going to lose. He knew from the point of where Biden said F-16s will eventually be delivered. The moment those F-16s are in the air over Ukraine, they can take out the Russian Navy in the Black Sea if you give them the right missiles. So he knows that strategically he's on a downer. He's only got till 2024, November 2024. He needs to get out of this. Now, in Russia, there's this doctrine. There is said to be a doctrine, escalate to de-escalate. We often thought it meant nuclear bomb negotiations in a war in Europe. That's the doctrine. I read everything he's doing from the point of view of a modified escalate to de-escalate strategy. That is, first of all, he blows the dam in Novokakhovka, not only destroying the long-term future of agriculture in southern Ukraine, but also in Crimea itself, unless that can be rebuilt. He does it openly. He does it as a signal. On the day the counteroffensive starts, he blows the dam. Next, he starts placing, we believe, explosives on the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. Next, his own, and I noticed this, his own propagandists start publishing articles about what circumstances would they be using tactical nuclear weapons. And then Prigozhin mounts the coup. And at the end of the coup, what happens? Half the people in Washington are saying, oh no, we can't push Russia any further, or Putin could fall and there could be chaos. And there could be harder line people like this guy in the Duma. There could be harder line people like him. Let's not push any further. I see that as choreography. I see that as statecraft. I don't see it as a series of accidents. I see it as a strategic move by Putin to do what? To bring NATO and the USA and Ukraine to a negotiating table where the conflict is yet again frozen so that he can get out of the dire straits. Then all the Western elite who are desperate to get back into the Rolex shops and the kind of boutiques of Valdai and Sochi can go back and say, hey, it's all over, guys. That's what's happening, to my mind. But large parts of it have to be based on analysis and surmise. Some of it, what I'm saying to you, is based on very good contacts I have in that region. But when I see the Western media go, we can't understand what's happened. How could you have a coup that ends up with the guys drinking tea and vodka 5 days later? I just say, wake up.
Yeah. So I want to thank you for that. And I also want to credit Hi-Fi for teaching me what the word KFABE means. I see it's happening a lot in our Congress. There will be a fight between two of the QAnon congressional leaders.
Green, Lord Boba.
Yeah, and it's all BS. So I want to thank you for that.
There's another bit of kayfabe that I've seen recently. Sorry to interrupt, Heidi, which is former U.S. officials are speaking with top Russians about a settlement. It's like, wait, who the fuck are these former officials, and they're former, and who are these top Russian people, and why is this on my television if there's zero actual details about any of this? And it seems to me that those kinds of stories get put in there to normalize the idea of negotiating with a guy who blew up a dam, who's trying to blow up, who's threatening to blow up a nuclear power plant. Yeah. I wonder if that fits into your, sort of this framework.
Well, Hi-Fi, you wanted to come in. I don't want to dominate the conversation.
Well, I got to throw a couple things in here. You talk about Alexander Dugin and how, he's this Western elites take him seriously. I would just like to point out the guy is marshmallow soft and he's no philosopher. He's afraid of me. He's a joke, right? Putin. When I was growing up as a child, we always said America does not negotiate with terrorists. Putin has engaged in war crimes. Putin has engaged in, menticide. Prigozhin has admitted it. We nightmared America.
Yeah.
Right. We know that Brexit was attached to the Russians in some way. Why are Western elites treating Putin seriously? And if they're worried about instability in Russia, why aren't they making plans for the second Putin falls, go in there and snatch all the nuclear weapons away from them? I don't understand why we are kowtowing to this murderous bully. I just don't.
It's really interesting, isn't it? I don't think look. I think there's a multi-layered problem. We had in the West, we had it. Boris Johnson. There are even new revelations coming out about Boris, the famous visit Boris Johnson made while he was foreign secretary, so our equivalent of the Secretary of State. He made it without a security detail to a villa of a guy who is the son of an ex-KGB agent, who he has now put into the House of Lords as an unelected legislator in our parliament. Okay, it still comes out, details about that. But that was the general atmosphere. You could do this stuff. Hey, I'm going without my security detail to a small airport in Italy, straight after a discussion about Ukraine, to meet someone who's the son of a KGB agent. I'm doing it en clair. I'm openly. That used to be the way the Western conservative and, to be honest, progressive elite could deal with Russia. I think it's clear now that they can no longer deal in that way. What a lot of them, I think, want to do is, as I say, they want to get back to normal. They want to get back to buying the oil. They think it's possible that the global order will come back kind of with Putin in power, and I don't. However, I think we have to be aware, because that so much of that staged chaos Prigozhin coup was kayfabe, that we don't quite understand what he's trying to what went right and what went wrong. What I think went wrong was that too many people in the system took it for real. So if you think that the citizens of Rostov on Don went to the streets and said, "Hooray! We're free for a day," I don't think that was in the script. I think some of the fighting wasn't in the script. So they're now trying to pick up the pieces and say, "Hold on, what we need to contain Prigozhin, give him the prize of going to Belarus, and then we regain command over our own army, and then what? Why doesn't the West do more? I think there's a failure of imagination. Western liberals can't imagine revolutions. They can't imagine their own overthrow by a reactionary revolution by Trump and the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers and a bunch of state level officials. They also can't imagine the collapse of the Putin regime. I think as a long-standing, lifelong Marxist, can quite easily imagine another Russian revolution. It's not going to be pretty. Some of these units that are standing up saying we've been pushed into battle, people with their legs shot off are being pushed back into battle without artillery support, horrible stuff going on. They're not going to make a revolution because they like Ukrainians. They're going to make a revolution because they probably hate Ukrainians, but hate their own government for failing to help them win. And eventually, Putin has to explain to the Russian people why there are no Apple iPads there's no Apple store. They are substantially cut off from the world, and will remain so if all that happens is that the conflict is frozen. I think The only other thing I'd say is the West, during the George Bush, Tony Blair era, got itself into the habit of all or nothing overthrows. So you know what happened with Saddam Hussein? They said, okay, we're going to destroy the Ba'ath Party, demobilize the Iraqi army. 2 years later, they're fighting the same forces in Fallujah as Al Qaeda, but it's not Al Qaeda. It's just the Iraqi army and the Ba'ath Party changed into Al Qaeda. There was a cynical phrase that used to be when I was in the BBC newsroom covering the Iraq War at the beginning. There was a phrase used by some of the old hands, and that is, "Why don't they just find another mustache, another guy with a mustache to run Iraq?" And in the neoliberal hubris period, they couldn't countenance that. No, we're going to go all for broke. We're going to reconquer Iraq. I think the West has to start thinking about another dour-faced Russian bureaucrat that doesn't want to blow the world up to smithereens with nuclear weapons, and there might be some around. The failure, between the liberalism, and I've appeared on platforms in London with Russian liberals, the like of which I would not naturally want to be on platforms with, to be honest, in the name of trying to create something that could replace Putin. But in the end, there's got to be sections of the regime and the oligarchy who in other words, if our offer is to Russian people is just, hey, liberalism, like the 90s, you know what they're going to say is, well, in the 90s, my grandmother, I saw it, I was there personally. My grandmother stood there in the snow with her pot and her pan and her wooden spoon. And when she sold the pan, the wooden spoon, the last fur hat keeping her head warm, she could buy some soup. That's what liberalism brought to Russia. They're not going to buy it. So again, the limitations of Western liberalism are demonstrated by its failure of imagination of what would it like to replace Putin with.
Wow. I know we only have a couple more minutes with you, but two quick things. In Dr. Zhivago, Boris Pasternak has a great line about, which group of hooligans is running the country today. And I just wanted to contribute that because you just reminded me of that. What you were describing with that KFABE is so bleak. And the concern that I have, and one of the last things I would like to get out of you for our audience here in America, is there's been a very successful campaign to make people not care about the war in Ukraine, to make people not wish to have what they're calling another endless war. And how can we decisively cut through those narratives to make people understand that it's not just about Ukraine. It is literally about the Western world order post-World War II that we are not doing enough to fight for.
Well, the first thing that we can do closest to home as members of the left is to educate and persuade those members of the left who've decided to treat Ukraine as an abstract thing. Let me give you an example. There was a Ukrainian journalist and author, Victoria Amelina, who was killed while dining with some Colombian leftists, liberals and leftists in Kramatorsk last week. That's a major event in Ukraine. She was almost given a sort of semi-state funeral. It's a major event here in Europe because Victoria Amelina had been touring Europe and in fact lived in Paris and was based herself in Paris to try and tell the story of Ukraine. Her poems are poignant. 2 days after she died, I got an email from our Stop the War movement, which is run by tankies and Confusionists. And it said, hey, we're having some stalls on to stop the war. Like an event had happened in the war that they didn't mention. Is it, if Dolores Ibarruri, La Pasionara, had been killed in a shelling bombing attack in the Spanish Civil War, you think the British Communist Party might have mentioned it 2 days later? So it's the abstraction. We are fighting a conscious abstractifying tendency on the left to make this all about a place called Ukraine that has no concreteness. Whereas for us, those of us who are engaged with it, I'm afraid it has too much concreteness. I see things on my timeline I shouldn't really want to see. I don't want anybody else to see. It's as soon as it's concrete, it will matter. So that's the first thing. In terms of the wider public, I think it's just it's the fault of the media. If the US media cannot make concrete the human story of a people suffering no genocide and certainly crimes against humanity, then it's failed. And I've seen great US reporters, Richard Engel of I think it's CNN, made some fantastic videos right at the beginning. But in the end, if it's only the same video over and over again, we run, we're out of breath, some explosions happen, bang. Well, maybe when the next liberation of a city happens, it could be Donetsk, it could eventually be Melitopol or even Mariupol. Look them up on a map. Make sure your readers and viewers understand where they are, what a big deal it would be if one of those cities were to be liberated. When we find out what's happening in those cities, any American network that does not lead on that is criminal, because what has happened in those cities is mass death, mass deportation, child theft, rape on a mass industrial scale. We need to know. If the liberation of Belsen, the concentration camp, had been third item on the news for one day, our view of what the Holocaust was would have been very different. And I'm afraid that's what I fear is going to happen when these towns and cities are liberated. But the first job is liberating them. And to do that, say to anybody watching this in the United States who has any power, Ukraine needs arms. It needs F-16s. It needs HARM missiles. It needs anti-ship missiles. Your duty is to give them all of that. Because if they do that, then you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to fight Putin. American soldiers don't have to worry. They can think about China, 10 years' time, 15 years' time, Taiwan. I'll tell you, if you live on the doorstep of this stuff, any European city, you get off a train, the main train station, there's a table. It says, Ukrainians, here, welcome, come here. And if you go to it, even now, you'll find shabbily dressed people with plastic bags, old ladies saying, where do I go? That's real. And so make it real.
Oh, thank you. It's hard not to get emotional because my parents were those shabbily dressed kids. Their parents were those shabbily dressed war refugees.
My great grandparents were, and
it's fucking real.
Everybody in America, in one way or another, so many people in America came through Ellis Island.
Yeah,
that's what we've got. There's 20 Ellis Islands happening in. Now, of course, it is absolutely socially unjust that those reception centers discriminate against Somalis, against Africans, against people fleeing Syria and Afghanistan. Absolutely, but that doesn't. But in the end, the world's on fire. I know everybody on this screen knows it. Yeah. Most people watching this know it, but what they don't really understand is how quickly the fire is going to come to them.
Yeah.
And I think let's go back to it. Let's leave one message to the viewers, anybody involved in American politics. There must be a movement and a political leadership that fights back in the information and hybrid war that Trump and Putin are waging against your democracy. It's not about waiting for primaries or delivering jobs. Great those things are, jobs, infrastructure. It's about somebody has to grasp the nettle and lead the fight back.
Thank you so much, Paul Mason. Thank you so much for that brilliant interview. We are so grateful. Thank you for
it's always a pleasure, Heidi.
Cutting through Confusionism. That's what we're going to do. Cutting through Confusionism.
I'm stealing that.
Yeah, that's a good one. I like that.
Paul, thank you very much. Keep fighting the good fight. We're going to do the best we can.